Alrighty, Spite, I've devised a fun challenge for you, a fun assignment for you to do, and I think you already know what it is based on the bike that's in front of us.
Yep.
You will be living with the Hayabusa.
Yeah, I can't exactly say I'm excited to ride around on
come
this
on!
big
You're not excited to ride this thing?
It's fun in short bursts, you know. I've ridden it around a couple of times here and there, and the joke kind of gets old.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll see how it stacks up in the daily ride. I've done a couple of videos with it, but other than that, I haven't really spent any real time with it.
Yeah, and I think that's why I wanted you to do this video, because I want you to experience the full Hayabusa, ownership.
I feel like I would need to get like a different haircut and a stretch and a turbo to really experience it.
I feel like Spite's gonna come back to the end of this just cornrows, flip-flops, a wife beater t-shirt or something like that.
You won't know where Spite ends and Reginald begins.
Exactly. Yeah, so get it out on the road and let's see how you do with it.
Let's do it.
Alrighty, everybody, getting started in motion here. Normally this is where I would put my first impression ride of the motorcycle that I'm currently riding. However, I have ridden this bike a handful of times, and the one thing that never ceases to amaze me about this motorcycle is just how huge it is. It is a gigantic motorcycle. The tank feels so wide between your knees. Just to give you guys some context, my SMCR, my knees are almost touching. There's probably about 6 to 8 inches between my knees, and I mean, at the very top. And then on the Ducati, you've got a similar gap between your knees. But on this bike, this right here, the widest point of the tank is where my knees sit. So my knees are this far apart from each other when I'm sitting on this motorcycle. It makes this thing feel gigantic. And that is the one thing that has never ceased to amaze me, is how big this motorcycle is. It's 550, 560 pounds worth of bike, and it earns every single pound. It really does. And you hear a lot of people say, well, the weight kind of disappears when you're riding it. The weight goes away. It doesn't feel that bad in motion. But the weight on the Hayabusa literally never stops feeling heavy. No matter what this bike does, it never lightens up. It never feels like a normal motorcycle. And, it's not. It's the Hayabusa, right? But that's kind of an Achilles heel, in my opinion. I kind of like the idea of my motorcycle feeling a little bit lighter, especially when I'm in traffic like this. So I'm currently going home, and while the dash says it's 3:30, if you can't tell by the sun, which hopefully this isn't blowing out the footage, it is currently closer to 5:30, and in traffic, the weight is a big pain in the ass, because you're going to be putting your foot down, you're going to be picking the bike up. You don't want a super heavy motorcycle. It's so fast. It picks up speed like nobody's business. And, again, normally this is where my first impression would go, but I think my goal, and I think it's more since I have ridden this bike before, my goal is to determine, can you actually live with a Hayabusa? We know that living with a CB300 or CB500R is possible. We know it's just not that hard. It's a normal motorcycle. Same with the Z650. But the living with portion here is the most important. Can you actually daily ride a Hayabusa and not want to kill yourself? Or not kill yourself doing so? Because this bike is ungodly, unrelentingly fast. So that's really what we're going to find out today, because the Busa is kind of a known quantity. Admit it. We all know that it's a known quantity. Everybody knows it's fast. Everybody knows it doesn't handle great. Aside from those Busa boys online in the comments section who think the Hayabusa is, a track bike. By the way, there is some footage of a guy ripping a Gen 2 Busa on a track and doing some unbelievable stuff. I do not know how this guy is riding like that. But so yeah, I really want to I want to apply a daily rider lens to this bike because we know other bikes are rideable, but is the Hayabusa rideable on the daily? And my gut impression is the answer to that question is no. I don't think that this motorcycle is a motorcycle that a normal human being could live with. And that's really what I want to find out. So since I'm kind of losing daylight here, why don't we pick up on another day, probably a ride in the city. I feel like that's a horrible place to take this motorcycle. Let's see what happens with a Hayabusa in downtown Austin. Alrighty everybody, we are now testing the Hayabusa in perhaps its least natural habitat, the downtown city streets of Austin, Texas here. Let's see how it does, and I have a sneaking suspicion that it's going to feel a little bit like riding a caged bear. Now, as we get underway here, one of the things that I want to point out is the Busa's slow speed is really not that bad. It's actually a pretty stable bike. All you got to do is just drag the rear brake, and it's about the only positive thing I'm going to say about the brakes in this segment. I find the bike very, very stable at slow speeds. I'm able to just feather the brakes and feather the clutch and clean stop signs basically at zero without really having to put a foot down, which is really nice, and that's down to the fact that this bike is actually very low. The seat height is very low. It's very approachable. I can have a very substantial bend in my knee when I'm flat-footing the bike, and that's down to, you know, what it was designed for. It was designed for doing these massive pulls and top speed runs, and it helps to have a low aerodynamic profile when you do that. So it actually makes the bike decent in the city. Now, on this motorcycle in particular, you'll notice that the fluid in the hydraulic clutch there is a little bit brown. We have not changed the hydraulic fluid in a little while. I suspect it's a little older than 2 years, and that's leading to a really vague clutch feel. The clutch works fine. It does what a clutch needs to do, and aside from pulling into a stop, you actually don't need the clutch in the city because you can do up to 90 miles an hour in first gear on this bike. But it just, the clutch feels really vague. It's not very precise. You can't really feel where the friction zone is. I mean, you kind of get it, but sort of not really. It's serviceable is what I would say. And I think it's a combination of the levers that are on this bike and the fact that we haven't changed the hydraulic fluid in a while. Now, when the bike's at a stop, you really start to feel the weight on this motorcycle. It's a lot to hold up with just one foot at a long red light like this. Even straight up and down, just a little bit of cross breeze, and the bike really wants to tip over. It doesn't make it the greatest in the city, especially down to the fact that you have like 108 foot-pounds of torque on this motorcycle, which is a ton of torque. However, this is an inline-4 motorcycle, so as long as you keep it, you know, down low in the RPM range, I'd say below 5 grand, you're gonna be just fine. It's really weird how docile this bike can be, but you have to be very measured with your throttle hand. This is certainly a bike that you could ride in the city in if you wanted to, but it's a lot. It's actually exhausting to ride mentally because you have to really modulate your throttle hand quite a bit. And another thing that's a little exhausting about the Hayabusa is its ergonomics setup. I haven't really talked about it too much, but the ergos are a little bit weird. They're somewhere between, you know, proper sport touring and super sport ergonomics. Not as aggressive as the Ducati. the Panigale, and not as relaxed as the CBR 500R. And the bars are really far from the seat. They're actually kind of a reach. And if this were my Hayabusa, God forbid, I would definitely need to put bar risers on here. I know a lot of people who ride Hayabusas religiously like to put at least some rise in the handlebars. And I think this would really help this motorcycle out quite a bit. The seat is really nice and comfortable. You know, it's nice and wide. It's, you know, built for a Busa boy. But the foot pegs are really kind of high, and it's meant for you to tuck into this attack position, you know, like so that you can get super aero and do your massive highway pulls. But you're not doing that in the city. And then the last thing I want to talk about before we get to the real black eye of this bike in the city is the heat. This bike, it gets a little toasty. I mean, it's putting down like 180 horsepower, 180-ish foot-pounds of torque. It gets real hot. And once it gets hot, it doesn't really cool off all that well. It takes a long time to get warm, but once it gets warm, yeah, you're baking yourself on it real easy. Now, our bike has a tune on it. Again, I feel like I'm not necessarily reviewing all Busas so much as I am this Busa. And I think that helps keep it cooler longer, but I'd imagine a Gen 2 modern Hayabusa being really warm. That guy just ran the red light. I'm not sure what he was doing. Now, the last thing I want to mention about this bike, and it's a problem everywhere, man, but it's really a pain in the butt in the city, and that's the brakes on this bike. My God, are the brakes just... There's something real wrong with having 12 pistons and this vague of a front brake feel. So basically, you grab the front brake feel, and you feel it like slow the bike a little bit. And you're like, okay, I need more front brake, please. And you pull and nothing happens. And then suddenly it just grabs. And it really will slow the bike down. But only after you're like, please stop, please stop, please stop. Oh God, stop, all 4 fingers. And then it's like, okay, I will slow down for you. I have chosen. So you have to have basically all 3 brakes, engine brake, front brake, rear brake, running at the same time to really stop the bike effectively. Now, we have bled the front brakes, we've swapped the pads. I just think the front brakes on this bike are pretty awful. Which sucks, you know. But hey, I mean, it's a lot of bike to slow down. So wrapping things up here, I think in the city, the Hayabusa is it doable? Absolutely. You could do it. Is it worth doing? Not really. It's not what this bike was built for. And yeah, sure, cruising around on a Busa in the city, you can flex, and a bunch of people are going to be looking at you and be like, oh, that's a Hayabusa. But they're not like in awe, they're more in like, ooh, that's a Hayabusa. Alright, now with that out of the way, why don't we get this bike into the garage and answer some Discord questions about the great and mighty Busa.
Alrighty guys, bringing the Busa into the garage here for a little bit. I wanted to talk to you kind of on a high level, some of the things that I like and some of the things that I don't like about this bike, just in case I'm missing it in the vlogs, because there's kind of a lot to cover on this bike. And let's start at the handlebars. The first thing that I do not like about this bike are these cheap little levers that are on this bike. Never, ever, ever put shorty levers on your motorcycle. It's just not worth it. But on the other side, I do like how wide these handlebars feel. Because they have these huge heavy slugs on the end of it, you can grab the handlebars really wide and get good turn feel on this bike. It's kind of nice, especially when you're, wrestling this beast through a corner. All right, the next thing I wanted to talk about is this dashboard. This dashboard's actually really cool. It's the old school dual analog needle and tachometer. it's so awesome to get this bike in the gears and just winding it out and watching it just bury the tachometer needle. Very cool, and especially when you turn it on, it has this amber color to it. It feels very old school, and that's because it is. This bike is from 2007 after all. Next up on our list of my favorite and least favorite things about this motorcycle here is this gas tank. Now, this gas tank looks huge, right? I mean, it's from here to here on this bike. 5.5 gallons, the spec sheet says. But you want to guess what my fuel mileage is? 19.5 miles to the gallon. That is abysmal. Modern pickups get more gas mileage than this bike does, and I think that's down to the tune on here, but even still, that's bad. The next thing I actually really like about this bike is its seating position. It's remarkably comfortable for what it is. It's ostensibly a sport touring motorcycle. My reach to the ground is really nice. The only thing I have about it is my knees are a little bit high up. If this were my bike, I'd probably look into dropping the foot pegs maybe a half an inch to get a little bit of breathing room. But the reach to the handlebars is nice. You can lean in if you want. You can sit up if you don't. There's a lot of space to move around on this motorcycle. And I actually put my girlfriend on here, and she liked the passenger accommodations. She said they weren't as comfortable as my VFR, but you know, it's an older motorcycle, so I guess there's that. Alrighty guys, rounding this section out here, I really think I like the looks of this bike. You know, it's kind of growing on me the more time I spend with it, to be honest. I understand why people don't like the look of this bike. It's big, it's ostentatious. Busa boys do stuff like this to it. But you know what? When you look at the bones of the motorcycle, it's a very striking, very iconic look, down to the period correct TI Force exhaust that this thing came with. I mean, it's a relic of its time, and for that, I actually really like the looks of it. I'm not super big on all the lights and so forth, but you know what? You do you. Busas are about having fun, right?
Alright guys, now the one thing that unifies Hayabusa men and Busa boys is the fact that you're going to be spending an awful lot of time at the gas pump. This bike is a thirsty baby, and you're not even going to get 100 miles to the tank on this particular Hayabusa. And so you're going to be pulling out your wallet an awful lot. When you go to the gas pump, you don't want to reach in your pocket, pull out of your wallet, and have a bunch of stuff fall everywhere. So thankfully, the Ridge makes the smarter choice. You've got yourself a nice compact wallet here that fits all of your cards in one nice neat package. This is actually my second Ridge wallet that I've bought. This one, I actually really like the burnt titanium on this one, so I went ahead and bought it for myself, and I could not be happier. The Ridge makes a whole bunch of wallets in a bunch of different colors, and if you want to get yourself one, click the link in the description below. Use the code Yammie Noob to get yourself 10% off on the best wallet you can. And now I'm going to put some gas in this bike for the third or fourth time, I think, that I've been doing this living with. I put a lot of gas in this bike. All right, everybody, welcome to a pretty chilly morning commute on the Hayabusa, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this bike, you know, just kind of poodling along the highway. We're not doing anything fun here. We're just riding the bike as if you're going to work, because that's exactly what I'm doing. And one of the things that I've noticed as I ride it more and more, and I talked about it a little bit in the city section, is how stable the Busa is at low speeds. Now, that has nothing to do with the throttle, because the throttle's a little weird, but it is just really easy to balance this motorcycle. It feels almost like my supermoto, except a lot heavier. It's the wheelbase is so long and the weight is so low that you can keep this bike basically straight up and down at 0 miles an hour. I'm also coming to realize that I'm not so much reviewing the Hayabusa as I'm reviewing this Hayabusa. I have a feeling that this Busa has some problems, and some of them I can solve probably, and some of them I can't. One that I don't want to screw with is the tune, because I can tell from experience tuning older motorcycles that have some issues is messing around with the tune can kind of goof the bike up. So I kind of want to leave it as is with regards to the tune. But one of the things I could, in theory, work on is the suspension. I think the suspension in the back is way overdone. I think it's got way too much dialed in, and it makes the bike feel just a little bit ponderous. And I have a feeling I could get this bike to handle about as well as my Interceptor did. You know, it did feel decently confidence-inspiring on the side of the tire, and I feel like I could get the Hayabusa to do that if I messed with the suspension settings. So I might look into it, although this has a actually fairly complex suspension. It's got, you know, preload, rebound, compression, all that crap, and I'm a little less confident goofing around with all of that than I am just regular preload. Now, when you're just poodling along the highway, you know, getting back to the actual topic of today, when you're just poodling along the highway on the Hayabusa, it feels fine. It's not like a leader bike where you're going and you're like, come on, man, are we really, this is just all we're doing? The Hayabusa is completely content to just sit here at 60 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour, whatever I'm doing. The bike doesn't have anything to prove, which is kind of funny, given the way that it looks and the people who ride it. But it will just sit here and happily do this. But, you know, you need to pass somebody, and then you crack the throttle open, and it's Hayabusa time. So it's not as ludicrously impractical when you're just doing a quick highway commute. And, you know, the wind protection, we have this bubble windscreen, and I think it's dumping wind literally right in the middle of my face, which is not where I would prefer to have it. So I feel like if I was riding a Busa on the daily, I'd get a lower windscreen so it hit me in the chest, kept my weight off the bars a little better. Another thing I would do if I was dailying this Busa is definitely get a set of handlebar risers. I think Helibike has a set for it, and I think it would really help raise you up just a little bit because it is a bit pitched forward. So I would rather be sitting more upright, like back here, than comfortably riding like this, because this is where the Busa wants me to sit, and this is slightly pitched forward, and I don't know, this isn't where I'd like to be every day. And again, it doesn't really feel, when you're just poodling around in the lower half of the RPM range, it doesn't feel overwhelming. It just feels usable. Which is, I'm afraid of those words that I just said, because it's the stupid Hayabusa. I'm not supposed to like this motorcycle. But because of how much power and how much torque it has, going through, you know, highway maneuvers is a breeze. You just give it a little bit of gas and it goes. Now, on to the subject of gas, which we're going to talk a lot about. Last night I had the needle about there where it is, which you can see is just on the line where it gets into the red zone. And I put precisely 1 gallon of gasoline into this tank. And it went right to the middle line. So my guess is that this bike is getting about 15 miles to the gallon right now, which is abysmal. It's like a V8, you know, when you're like a Scat Pack Charger or something like that, or a 5.0 Mustang. You sit at a stoplight and you give it a rev and you watch the gas go down. I've never been on a motorcycle that is this gas hungry before in my life. And I looked it up because I was curious how big this gas tank is. And they claimed 5.5 gallons. I call BS on that number. It's got to be closer to 4. There must, like, the fuel pump must be the size of a car tire or something, because it's ridiculous how big this gas tank is for it to only take 1 gallon to go from empty to halfway. Or maybe just the top end of the gas tank is, you know, the top half of the gas tank lasts a little longer than the bottom half. Either way, this is not a practical highway commuter because it just doesn't have legs. It's really weird. But again, I think I'm reviewing this Hayabusa. I think a normal Hayabusa probably has around 30 miles per gallon or something like that. Just given the massive displacement of the motorcycle and the weight and all that crap. And it's not exactly the most fuel-sipping motorcycle. But I'm getting up towards the office, so I'm going to cut it here and we'll pick it up another day.
Alrighty guys, we are bringing the Hayabusa back into the shop and answering some Discord questions. Whenever I do one of these living withs, I like to poll our Discord for just some random questions about the bike in question. I'm saying question a lot. And today, the Hayabusa has brought forth some great quandaries and queries and so forth about it. And let's see what they've got. First, we have Ishrin Does It Endo. Not really, no. Two things. It's got a long wheelbase and the front brakes suck. So it doesn't really stop all that great. But hey, that's kind of a good thing because it means you can't wash the front tire out. So you don't really need the ABS. You just need to, I don't know, maybe have a block to slow down instead of, you know, being able to stop and ending up in an intersection or something like that. Next up, we have Vanilla Schlong. The Busa is technically a sport touring bike. How well does it do in the touring part? It's actually really good. The weight is down low, it's very stable, and the engine is super understressed at highway speeds. It's at about 4,000, 3,500 RPM at 70 miles an hour, and it still has enough power on tap to just pass anything. So, you know, there's no cross breeze issues. You really don't have to worry about passing cars, and there's a ton of room to put bags and top cases and saddlebags, and there's a bunch of space under the seat. You can carry whatever you want on this bike. And I actually put my girlfriend on here very briefly to test the passenger accommodations, and she said it was actually really comfortable. Not as good as my VFR, but for what it is, she appreciated the nice cushy seat and the nice solid grab bar too. Tube asks, what makes it a good beginner bike? Well, obviously it's because it has a nice, supple, easy to use power band that allows you to grow into it super well. This motorcycle allows you to experience a little bit of power as you're getting started, and then as you get used to it, there's enough on tap to keep you entertained. Now, obviously, this motorcycle is a horrible beginner bike, and this one in particular has this sort of kind of jagged rush of power at 2,500-ish RPMs when you're just kind of at neutral throttle. It's like go, 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 and then it's like, okay, now it's time to go. It really picks up steam. There's this like wall. I think the map is not quite right. And it really picks up steam at 2,500-ish RPM. That would definitely scare a beginner. Although the idea of putting a beginner on a Hayabusa is kind of just laughable to me. It's really kind of just a bit of comedy. Whiskey Tango asks, Spite, are you going to attempt a wheelie on the mighty Busa? I am actually horrified of the idea of trying to wheelie this motorcycle. I do not have the fortitude, the just sheer willpower and Kyle energy to attempt to wheelie this motorcycle. So I'm sorry to let you down. I will not be wheeling the Hayabusa anytime soon. Super Squid asks, Spite, should I buy a $1,000 Craigslist 2003 Busa that runs, probably poorly, with a terrible blue airbrush pattern and 40K miles? Well, I would not buy a $1,000 motorcycle just because that sounds way too good to be true. But honestly, 40,000 miles on the Hayabusa is nothing. This engine can take it and take it and take it and take it, and it will just keep running. No matter what I do to this motorcycle, it just starts. The only time I've had an issue with it starting was when I left the, actually I didn't really leave them on, I just had them on. I had the lights under the fairings on for a little while I was riding, and it didn't want to start up the second time. So that caused a little bit of an issue, but then I just plugged the SAE cable into another bike and was able to start it up just fine. This bike is a freaking tank. Now, again, 1,000 bucks, way too good to be true, probably pass and wait for another one, but hell, I mean, this is a bike that just lasts and lasts and lasts and lasts, so there are worse motorcycles to buy. A. Riley asks, Spite, what is the long-term goal for the YN Busa? You guys already know what the goal is. The goal is to turbo this motorcycle, and the ball's in your court. It's gonna happen at 1 million subscribers, so if you wanna see us turbo this bike, you gotta subscribe to the channel. But yeah, that's kind of the main goal, is to turbo this motorcycle. It's just kind of fun to ride around, so I don't really want to turbo it, but that's the way we live now. We gotta have a Turbo Busa in the shop because, you know, the memes are too powerful, I guess. Try the Snake asks, how hard or expensive will the turbo be? I would wager that buying a turbo for this bike, I haven't done a whole lot of research, but I think turboing the bike would be like $4 grand for the turbo itself, and then getting somebody to install it would probably be $1,000, $1,500, $2 grand depending. And honestly, I really do not want to get in and turbo this bike because it's a lot of work. I looked into it very briefly, and you got to drill the bottom of the oil pan. You got to do a lot of stuff to this bike, and you really change it. That's not something that I'm confident in doing, and I say that as somebody who bungled his way through a 1275 swap on a Sportster, and that bike still runs fine. We probably could do it, but is it worth it? Not really. Kialna asks, what is the biggest drawback of the bike? The biggest drawback of this bike is actually probably its looks. I have gotten some really just sidelong, you know, kind of reviled looks from this motorcycle. It doesn't have the kind of curb appeal that something like the Ducati does, or this. It doesn't have the curb appeal of something like our Panigale or the Sportster or Yam's Desert Sled, or even my KTM. I get a lot of people asking me about that bike in particular because it looks different. This bike is just kind of what a normie would think a crotch rocket looks like, and they think it looks kind of just cheap and plasticky. The general looks of it, I like it, but I understand that people really wouldn't, and again, it's just people, unless you ride it, you don't understand why it looks like this. You think it's just kind of ugly. Monochrome asks, do drivers behave differently around you on the Busa compared to other bikes? Yes, they do. I get a lot more people who are like looking at my bike when I'm not on the Busa. People kind of like look at the Busa, like I said earlier, and just they don't like the look of it. However, car guys who know what the Hayabusa is and they think they're in a fast car and we're at a stoplight, they'll sit there and rev their engine. They want me to go, but you know, that's the last thing I need to do right now. It's a bike that if you understand what it is, you know it's fast, and car guys always want to prove themselves against a Busa. So you get some muscle car guys showing up next to you revving their engine a little bit. And then again, you just give them just a little bit on a roll off and they can't keep up. Greeny asks, I know lane splitting and filtering isn't a thing in Texas, but I wonder how the Busa would handle. So basically, how is it behaving doing the slow speed stuff? Well, filtering wise, it's actually a really wide motorcycle. It's definitely, from mirror end to mirror end, it's probably like this wide from hand to hand. And that can be a bit much to squeeze between cars sometimes. It's kind of too big to filter in places that aren't in America because, you know, our roads are more wide than somewhere in like England. But as for slow speed stuff, it's actually really good. The weight, again, is really down low on this bike, And the wheelbase being kind of long makes it super duper stable. I can clean a stop sign and hit 0 miles an hour without putting a foot down really, really easily on this motorcycle. And again, that's down to the super duper low weight and long wheelbase, and I don't know, just me being really good at riding a motorcycle, I guess. Last question today comes from Kilroy. Spite, what's it like constantly being flooded with hot babes because of the Busa? Literally no one cares when you ride a Hayabusa. Unless A, they're another Busa boy, or B, they're a motorcyclist that has an appreciation for the Hayabusa. It's a bike that if you know about the history of it, you think it's cool. But if you don't, it's just a big, stupid motorcycle and nobody cares. You'd rather look at something like the Panigale. You'd rather look at something like the R1 or a fancy cruiser, something like that. This bike it's really not easy on the eyes. So nobody really wants to come up and talk to you about it. Now that is going to wrap up our question and answer section for this video. Remember, if you would like to participate in future question and answers, you got to join the Discord, link in the description down below over on YammieNoob.co. Now I'm going to get this motorcycle out on the road and start wrapping up my thoughts on this bike.
Alrighty everybody, rounding things out here on the Hayabusa on Lime Creek, which, believe it or not, I actually have not taken the Busa down Lime Creek before. And I gotta tell you, it's not great. It's really not great. I followed a school bus in because, believe it or not, people actually live out here. And the Busa felt about as effective through the corners as that school bus looked to be. I think that there's a lot of contributing factors. Sure, this bike's performance could be improved, because ostensibly it is a sport bike, right? Out here through these corners, the Busa's not about going quick, it's just kind of about enjoying a nice Sunday cruise, you know? To round out my thoughts on this bike, honestly, if I'm being perfectly honest, guys, I love this motorcycle. I really do. I can't believe the words are coming out of my mouth, but I love the Hayabusa. It's a relic of a bygone era, and there really aren't any bikes like it anymore. And it reminds me a lot of my 919 in that sense, being both these big, you know, in the 919's case, under 1,000, and this one way over 1,000 cc inline 4s from 2007. They're not really great engines. They're bulletproof. Absolutely, they're bulletproof, but they don't make as much power as they could because people didn't. I mean, the technology wasn't there, and in that sense, believe it or not, guys, the Busa's not that fast. And I can't believe the words are coming out of my mouth, because obviously this bike is capable of going go-to-jail speeds in the blink of an eye. And you know, if you're not paying attention and you crack the throttle just a little too hard on this bike, you'll absolutely yeet yourself into the sun. But compare it to something like the modern R1. You know, we did our big R1 versus Busa showdown. And between the weight and the lower compression ratio of this bike and the R1's technology, modern leader bikes have really left this thing, you know, they've left it in their dust. But the Busa doesn't care, right? It doesn't care that there are other bikes that are faster. All it wants to do is go out and enjoy a nice Sunday cruise down some twisty roads, or more preferably down a highway at midnight, you know, wide open throttle. But the Busa's just happy to tag along, you know, and it'll do whatever you want it to. You know, do you want to just putter around a twisty road at less than a quarter throttle? The Busa will do that happily. Do you want to go just flat out, full on stupid mode, mega pulls? You totally could do that. I've seen people do absolutely bananas things with Hayabusas on tracks, you know? this bike is more capable than I originally gave it credit for. There's just something about it that I love, being so big and so stupid, because really this motorcycle is stupid. There's nothing about it that isn't really. The engine being 1300 cc's or 1298 or whatever it is, or the 12 pistons up front on the 2 brake calipers just don't really slow the bike down. That's stupid. The way it looks is stupid, and not down to the fact that we've got Yammie-chan on there, who's adding at least 40 horsepower to the rear wheel, obviously. But the bike is just dumb, and I like dumb bikes. The Sportster's a dumb bike, and I love it. And the more I've spent time with this bike, and the more I've ridden it around, and the more I've just come to appreciate how it wants to tag along. It's like a big basset hound. Not very smart, not very quick, but you know, you get him going in a straight line and he'll chase you down real good, but he also just wants to hang out. There's something admirable about that in a bike, especially in the world where, you know, TFT displays and super fancy technology, 6-axis IMUs that read what your tires do every, you know, 1,000 times a second. All that this bike is 2 sweeping needles, which are in a carbon inlay dash, and a throttle, and that's it. It's a classic, man. It's a great bike for all the wrong reasons, you know. But here's the thing. Here's the question: would I own a Hayabusa? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. I would probably, if, you know, the next question being, are you a Busa boy or a Hayabusa man? I'm probably a Hayabusa man. But, you know, I think that I wouldn't be a Gen 2 Hayabusa man. I'd be a Gen 1 Hayabusa man, because I like this. I like this mill. I like the way it sounds. This bike sounds unlike any other motorcycle, really, that I've ridden. It has this whine in the intake, this little whistle, which I'll shut up so you can hear it a little bit. The bike just whistles at you all the time, and it has this growl to it. Again, it's unlike any other bike that I've ever ridden. And you know what? I'd probably go one step further. Depending on this bike's fate, you know, whether it's turboed or, you know, we sell it and get some other bike that's already turboed, whatever this bike's fate is, if the price is right and it's not, you know, a complete wadded up lump of garbage, I would honestly consider buying this Hayabusa. It's not a great bike. It really isn't. It needs a lot of work. I think the forks are leaking. Something needs to be done to these brakes, and the clutch probably needs to be replaced, and definitely the fluids need to be replaced. But I would seriously consider owning this motorcycle. And it's the first of the Living With bikes where I can say that. And that's kind of cool, actually. So now that we are at the end of this video, I think I need to give this bike a completely arbitrary and meaningless rating. And I think I'm going to go ahead and give the Hayabusa a 7-foot swing arm out of 10-foot swing arm. And, you know, who knows? Maybe one day Yam will be done with this bike, and it will maybe one day it will be a Spites bike, but who knows? In the meantime, I got to get this bike over to Yam begrudgingly, and I will catch you guys in the next one.
Keep watching Yammie Noob. 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 Keep watching Yammie Noob.